We ran the rest of the way back, just in time to see Gloria, in her natural Krynos form, and Stormclaw, still in Hamid, right in each other's faces. Which was not surprising. You can trust there's always an arrow somewhere, in someone's face. All that rage, it isn't easy to keep in check. But recent events gave me a sinking feeling in my stomach, especially when I looked behind Aaron, towards the stranger behind him. The stranger looked at me and casually tapped Stormclaw's shoulder. The warder turned his attention to me, ignoring the Krynos, clearly about to break him in half. Doing that in Hamid was a power play if I ever saw one. "Ah, the man of the hour," he exclaimed. I figured reining in Gloria might be a good idea, so I attracted her attention to me. "Gloria, what's this about?" "Bullshit! It's about bullshit, outdated crap!" she snarled back. Now, Garou born. Challenges are a time-honored tradition. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Master of Challenge? Doesn't my tribe mate Calvin here have the right to challenge Horus for the honor of my niece's love? Apparently, Molly hadn't had time to talk him out of something like this yet. Although, to be fair, the fact that the stranger was already here clearly showed this was planned in advance. I felt sick. Sick and furious. I wanted to bash his head in. A strong hand clasped on my shoulder, stopping me in my tracks. I turned around to see a Krynos I'd only rarely seen before in my life. That of my packmate, Firehound, who rarely saw a need for 2 legs and 2 hands. But hands were exactly what he needed, so Krynos it is, even though it was quite overkill just to hold little me back. Sharp Eyes, whom you might remember from the moot as the Truth Catcher, was a very busy man holding up 2 important stations. Right now, though, he was acting as the Master of Challenge. He stepped up in the middle of all of us, also casually in Hamid, giving off an air of fuck around and find out, somehow even more convincing than Stormclaw's, despite being lower rank and a much less accomplished fighter. One can never accuse the Shadow Lords of lacking confidence. "As you well know, Warder," answered Sharp Eyes. "He does." He gave us all a look, like we were quarreling teenagers wasting the principal's time. People hearing the commotion were filing in. This was getting very public and out of hand. Right or wrong, challenges were popular entertainment. Soon, most of the Sept outside of the Guardians would be here to witness whatever challenge I would have to answer to. "Aaron, stop this!" Jane yelled. She'd grown familiar with Stormclaw recently, as you might recall. He'd become a sort of secondary mentor to her in a bid to buy the peace between him and my pack. But this was about family, and there was no way he would budge. He didn't like me, and he'd never let me be with Molly. And that was that. "Jane, you're out of your depth," he said, almost kindly. "Step back and let this play out." "No!" she screamed back. "You're better than this!" I know she meant well, but he was an Athro, almost elder. You couldn't have a cub talk him down in public. We all knew it. I saw Gloria shift her weight subtly around, almost imperceptibly, ready to physically intervene between them if anything went south. Honestly, I didn't know that she could take on Stormclaw. But her odds were a hell of a lot better than mine, let me tell you that. "Better?" he replied. "You don't get it. You don't get this. You're too young. Step away, cub. Final warning." "You're right," she replied. "I don't get it. How can someone's priorities get so twisted?" she said, not backing down. "Priorities?" he snapped. His patience was running out. "What could be more important than family?" "Gaia!" I answered him, hoping to get some of the heat off of Jane. I saw Gloria shift her weight again. I didn't love how he looked at me, but if he lunged in my direction instead of her, Gloria could intercede just as easily, and Firehound was still holding me. I liked those odds better. "Gaia!" I repeated. "We're in the middle of God knows what. with black spiral dancers at our door. And you're doing this. I am thinking of Gaia, you idiot, he called back. You're the one ignoring her word, parading around with mules. That was a mistake. Fuck you, came Gloria's scream. That's it. You're going down. Right now. She was ready to murder. She glanced at the Master of Challenge, who nodded back. He looked at Aaron. He nodded too. The challenge was clear. There was no need for formality, or words even. This would be a fight, and it would be to the death. Hold! Came a deep, resounding voice. Dreadhorn and Krynos stood a few feet taller than most. Nothing short of a commanding voice could have stopped those two. The challenge has been issued and agreed upon, countered the Master of Challenge, as Dreadhorn stepped in next to Gloria. I know, she answered. The challenge is valid, and it will happen. But Gloria is too far below Stormclaw's rank. This is not an honorable challenge. Gloria, you cannot challenge him. But I can. Dead silence fell on the entire crowd as realization dawned on us all about what was going to happen. We were without words. This was history unfolding before us. Giants about to clash. I've told the tale of their first fight, of how Stormclaw hadn't been allowed a kill shot before the challenge was over, and of Dreadhorn's stubborn determination to just refusing to fall had led her to winning the duel. She would have no such protection this time. This challenge was to the death. Aaron would not hold anything back. All right, said the Master of Challenge, shaken possibly for the first time in his life. Certainly the first time I'd ever seen him shaken anyway. But he immediately got his game face back on. Dreadhorn challenges Stormclaw to the death for years of grievances against her and her breed. Anything to add? Yes, said Aaron. When I win, I will rid this sept of all Garou born. If you value your life, you have been warned. No, be fair, countered Dreadhorn. Give them a day to prepare and leave on their own terms. He considered it for about a second, then answered, 1 hour. No more. Fine, agreed Dreadhorn. You bastard. Those of us standing too close, that was me, Jane, Firehound, Gloria, Sharp Eyes, and a couple of others, carefully receded back into the gathered crowd. Aaron finally shifted into Krynos and went all in. Not in a blind idiot rushing into battle way, in a controlled series of high-speed bursts of violence. Tack, 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 tack. Always a series of 2 to 4 blows, punctuated by a short pause. If the first hit didn't land, the next usually would. The first few hits, they weren't meant to actually hit. They were meant to keep the enemy on the defensive and off balance, creating openings he was lightning quick to capitalize on. I guess that's where his name came from, Stormclaw. Fighting him would have been like fighting back against a hailstorm. There's just no way to protect oneself from such unrelenting assaults. Dreadhorn kept taking the hits, but she never faltered, even though her blood sprayed left and right. Then something changed. Subtle at first, but more and more evident. As the seconds went by, the rhythm changed. Fewer and fewer hits landed. While before, maybe 2 out of 3 claw strikes ripped fur and flesh, suddenly there was 1 out of 3. Aaron took an extra second to think. When the realization dawned on him too, he changed his stance and went for a 4-strike kill. First hit, miss. Second hit, parried. Third hit, block. Fourth hit, grabbed. Dreadhorn's claw sunk into his arm violently, pulling it out of its socket. Her elbow dropped on his neck. He was on the ground in a second, a loud crack resounding from somewhere in his body. I did not know where, but I knew regeneration would have a hard time healing this one. He screamed in pain, locked on the ground in a hold he could not get free from. Proud, arrogant fool, she said, getting ready for the kill. For decades, you were so sure you could take me. And that was probably true once. But I studied you for all those years. I watched all your fights. I learned how you fought, preparing for this inevitable day. I needed a second to put theory to practice, you understand, to get your timing down pat, until I could shake your confidence and force you into making a mistake. Wasn't sure I could pull it off, if I'm being honest, but here we are. Goodbye, Aaron. Thank you for your service to the Sept. No! Came a scream from the crowd before Dreadhorn could move. Molly had arrived at some point during this horrible mess. Dreadhorn, please! He's flawed, but he took me in when my mother died. Raised me like a daughter, she pleaded. Courageous kinfolk, pleading with an elder to save her uncle's life. The elder was moved, but ultimately we all knew she could not grant that wish. It had been too much for too long. The Sept was watching, the spirits were watching, but her hold loosened as she searched for the right words to say to that, which was all Aaron needed. He swooped Dreadhorn off her feet and readied his claw to slash her throat open. Instead, Gloria kicked his good shoulder, the one that wasn't dislocated, ripping flesh at the juncture with her claws. Then she grabbed his arm with both hands, digging her claws deep for a better grip, and yanked the whole thing free. The hell you think you're doing? Screamed the Master of Challenge at Gloria. The hell you mean, what am I doing? She screamed back. That wasn't legal. You took advantage of his niece's distraction in a formal challenge. No way that's fair. Dreadhorn should not have allowed herself to be distracted, replied the Master of Challenge. That's on her. The worm isn't concerned about fair. Let this be a lesson to you, Fostern. I decree the punishment rite of the voice of the jackal be performed upon you at the next moot, for raising your voice, not to mention your claws, in a rite you had no business messing with. I won't keep quoting everyone, but you can imagine it did not go down well. Half the Sept agreed with the punishment, the other half raged over the unfairness of it. Surprisingly, Dreadhorn herself sided with sharp eyes. In the end, Sarah's angry voice rose above the rest and shut everyone up. Enough! Do you take challenges as a joke? We are making a mockery of this. The spirits preside over challenges. They do not babysit children. Two of our own found love, and instead of celebrating it, we are spilling blood and piling, 3 challenges on top of each other? What is this? Hasn't it occurred to any of you that there might be a reason Dreadhorn was stopped from killing Stormclaw, and he was stopped from killing Dreadhorn? Maybe because the spirits willed it so? Because we're in the fucking end times, and we need all of our warriors to survive the damned apocalypse. Or have you all forgotten the end times? She turned to Jane. Since you are behaving like children, I will let the youngest of us all show you the error of your ways. Jane, the spirits have spoken. The signs are there. The challenge failed for a reason. Recall what you've seen and put it together for them. Jane turned from an angry red to an odd green purple, an impossible shade of embarrassment and fear. But she did what she was told, and by the power invested in her by a pissed-off Thurge, everyone listened. Dreadhorn, it's not healthy to spend decades planning how you'll kill one of your Septmates. Stormclaw shouldn't be here. You've developed a sick codependence based on nothing but hate. It's not right. He should leave and be where he can fit, where he can make a difference. He was right about me going back to school, and you couldn't hear it. Don't get me wrong, I was grateful back then, but I didn't know. I hadn't seen our rage in action. Look at us today, ready to kill each other. And you allowed one of us in high school? I'm not saying he deserves forgiveness. He doesn't. I'm not saying you should get a free pass. He doesn't. And I'm not shaming you, God, no. You're wonderful and kind. I'm just saying, let go of the hate that binds you together. Let go of him. Send him away. You don't need him now like you did all those years ago. Back then, the Sept was rebuilding after a tragedy. You have options today. Hell, Miriam could be the warder even if she's just a kin. It would still be better than this madness. This is the message the spirits are sending you today, I think. A nod from Sarah confirmed it. Before Jane could get back to the protection of the crowd, Sarah intoned, "You're not done, sweetling." "Damn it." Jane turned back. "And you, Stormclaw. I'm grateful for the wisdom of the earth you've been teaching me. It's been a helpful complement to Sarah and Vivid Keen's own teachings. But you're consumed with anger and hate. Surely the great warder of the Sept of the Shadows by Firelight is aware of the urgeworms, specifically the urgeworm of hate. Surely you aren't blind to the truth that spirits have accepted the Garou-born. How else could they have their own gifts? What more evidence do you need to see that we're supposed to prevent the sin, not hate the sinners, and definitely not the victims? If you don't see the error of your ways, and soon, you will fall. And if you're still here then, you may bring us all with you. What if either of you had died today, with enemies literally at our gates? There are more Black Spiral dancers out there. We don't even know how many. And that was surely the worm's plan. He has spirits too, and they too nudge events in their favors. Thank Gaia that plan did not work, for our spirits were able to stop this. And they are speaking, and they are screaming for us to fix our ways. For us to fix our ways. To mend old wrongs. And face this challenge as one. Somewhere in there, she'd shifted gears and went into full Galliard mode. I was rather proud of that speech. Not that I had anything to do with it, but I was proud of her, of how much she'd learned in so little time. She was just a cub, certainly, and such insubordination in any other context would ever kill an outrage, but this specific context and those specific words struck a chord. Something happened. Something changed in the Sept. We all felt it, although we didn't quite know what had changed and how. But on this we agreed. The spirits had spoken in their ways, and they had been heard. And it was up to us to think, and think hard. The group dispersed, and we regrouped. "Holy crap, Jane," Gloria said. "I can't believe you said all of that." "Me neither," she replied. I doubt it'll move the Master a challenge, though. I don't think he'll let you out of the Rite. It's all right. I did what I did. I stand by it, and I pay whatever price comes with it." "It doesn't seem fair," Jane insisted. "My dear, that's the Shadow Lords for you. They're not exactly unfair, usually just very harsh." "Speaking of," I said, "this might be a swell time for you to talk to him. Get to learn about them while we make sure Buzzword gets set up." Before she spoke a single word, he told her no. She was flustered by that. Or maybe she was just shaken by everything that had just happened. She pleaded, saying he didn't even know what she was here for. "You are here for my tribe's secrets," he said. "You won't have them." She asked him why, the way a child asks why they can't have a cookie. He told her, "You don't have what it takes. To be a Shadow Lord, you need to be ready to do what must be done, to sacrifice anything and anyone." She made a somewhat puzzled look. "Sir," she said, "half the tribe I spoke to made the claim that they're the only ones to do things right, or who are willing to do what must be done. You like challenges, don't you? Why don't I challenge you to prove why your tribe is correct?" He smiled and answered, "For someone who just translated the words of the spirits through a challenge, you've not learned a thing, have you? To challenge above your station isn't wise. To challenge beneath mine isn't honorable. We would both lose face." "Wrong," she declared, with the self-assurance of youth. "I'm a cub. No one's telling my stories yet. I have no renown to lose. You would lose face. That's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. For my enlightenment." He genuinely laughed and invited her in. One must respect a good loophole, however forced and inadmissible this one may have been. "What you need to know about us," he told her, "is all in the name. We are lords, and we are shadows. The worm isn't honorable. It isn't chivalrous. Our leaders, the Silverfangs, believe such traits can win the battle, but it only binds us, slows us. Our refusal to do what must be done in the name of honor has cost us much, and so our field of battle is chivalry and honor and politics. Because these things are the obstacles that must be brought down so the Garou can actually get to work. We navigate the politics and the traditions so that when the time comes, we are ready to strike." Note, I did not say we didn't have honor, or that we were unchivalrous. If you think us harsh, know that we strive to be the best of the best, and we hold ourselves to the very highest of standards. One cannot fight an enemy they do not understand. So we are diplomats, kingmakers, advisors, the perfect betas. We are lords. Does that make us hypocrites? Many believe so. But they still call us lords. They still show us deference. And more importantly, they march when we point them towards the enemy, and that's what matters. He put these notions into perspective for her. He said, "I'm sure you've heard of the glorious stories of the Silverfangs during the Baba Yaga's reign of terror. How they alone heroically stood, shining beacons of light to save the day. Standing strong, standing proud. But the story doesn't tell how they barely did a thing until that point. How they failed to stop it from ever happening in the first place. How could they have known, you might say? Well, they could have tried, instead of reveling in their own glory, to grow complacent over their past successes. If not their own, then their ancestors. That's good enough. The fangs shine the brightest in the dark. They do, but only when that darkness comes to them. They do not dwell in that darkness. They do not explore it. Don't get me wrong. They do not fear it. I am not calling them cowards. I am calling them vain. They fear getting their pristine coats dirty. But we are the lords of those shadows. We make it afraid of us. We rule it with a dominating hand so it can never, ever engulf us. Ending threats long before they come gunning for our septs and our kins. And so we are spy masters. We are knives in the dark. We are the villains of their stories. We are the shadows. And if that makes the Garou fear us, distrust us, well then they're welcome. For we know they can do so because they are alive, because we struck first against the tide they never even knew was there. We are lords, but we are no kings. Kings get drunk on power. Kings do what the Fangs do, which is to say next to nothing. And let me tell you this, if you think us hypocrites, kings are no less so. For all the razzle-dazzle they like to put on in public, we can tell you that in private, kings can be the most depraved, because they can get away with it. In the earliest days of our tribe's history, we were servants. We were all about loyalty to the kings. For a strong leader makes a strong nation, but we saw the abuse. We remember the buried corpses, because we were the ones sent to bury them. Because then we were loyal. We endured, we believed. They would ask anything of us, and we would do them. So we learned not to follow those attracted to power for power's sake. And we learned not to make that mistake ourselves. We command respect, yes. We are always in positions of strength, yes. Of control, yes. The better to drive the nation into action. But we avoid direct leadership, direct power. To one important exception. In Europe, the Margrave Yuri Konietzko is a powerful Shadow Lord, one who has started a new alliance of tribes in the Balkans. The Black Furies and Red Talons of the region have banded behind him. The situation in the 90s and early 2000s was dire enough. Here, she called him out on what she perceived to be him bullshitting. She asked how he could point finger to the Silverfangs in Russia when, in fact, the Shadow Lords let the Balkans get so apparently wrong. He answered that he would spare her the historic details of the Balkans and Wallachia, but explained that there, too, in fact, the Fangs are to blame. For, in our hour of need, he said, when we were in the middle of a war against terrible flesh-crafting vampires, able to create towering fiends of bones and claws as long as my arm, they came to, quote, save us, meaning they took over instead of helping us out. What's happening now is the Margrave taking control back from them, fixing centuries of mistakes, cleansing lands that are literally infested by vampires and the worm's corruption. He explained that now that they had a chance to rise up, it was working. Slowly but surely, the nation was starting to see the kinds of results that can be brought about when the Garou stopped squabbling and arguing about right and wrong. What's right, he said, is defeating the worm. What's wrong, he added, is letting it win based on made-up concepts. She made some argument about how two wrongs can't make a right, and he just asked her, why not? Had she ever tried? He said, purposefully, calculatingly, tried to make a positive outcome from out of a series of apparently negative actions. Didn't she, herself, kill a person on the first day of becoming a werewolf? Her schoolmate may have become an irredeemable monster, but wasn't she raised to believe that life was sacred, that one should not kill? Didn't that action, in fact, save many more that night? By that standard, this action she would have seen as wrong months ago led to something good. Did she not now believe she did, in fact, do something good? Had she not since killed Baines and been complicit in the death of a Black Spiral dancer she never even really knew? It's really a matter of seeing of how far back the line can be pushed back before wrong becomes evil, and that's the line that must never be passed. Your actions, even questionable ones, he continued, must be in service to the greater good. But if your deeds spread abuse or feed your greed, then that's evil, and we will not suffer it. Be you servant or king, we will bring you down, however long it may take. quick as lightning, or loud as thunder. And we will come like a flash in the night. And that is what people always fails to understand about us. They see us as schemers, betrayers and liars, but fail to see that those who point to us the most are those who have reason to fear us. They would rather have others focusing on us, rather than scrutinizing them too closely. To those who would hide their dark secrets in the shadows, we will bring fear. She clearly had much to think about. He let her ponder aloud, answered a few of her questions, and sipped his drink. Then she asked about their great patron, Grandfather Thunder. He said, "He is an exacting master. Nothing short of excellence will please our father. His storms cleanse with water and fire. It strikes fear in the hearts of those with weakness in their hearts. For once its fury is past, the old makes way for the new, for the better. And we do the same. We cleanse the corruption and build towards a better future." She was surprised to hear the controversial position that the Shadow Lords believe that Grandfather Thunder is Gaia's lover. She is the earth, and he is the skies. She is the mother, and he is the father. A match made in literal heaven, according to the Shadow Lords. Wisely, if she questioned this notion, she kept it to herself. And that was that, mostly. For a while after that, she stayed and shared her thoughts on the events of the day and those that had led to it. They spoke about right and wrong and honor and respect, about the death she was already responsible for and those she would be in the future, about his harsh judgment and how she thought that he was wrong, to which he asked her to pay attention over the next few weeks and months, how these events and his hard choices would affect how things play out, and how a little pain today, in the end, will bring about a greater good. This has been A Rite to Remember Season 2, Episode 16, a series of lore videos for Legacy Werewolf the Apocalypse presented through an immersive narrative. Before we get to the dreaded Shadow Lords, for now, let's take a look at the ugliness of Stormclaw's action in this episode, because it is an example of why these toxic elements exist within Werewolf. Within those dark and terrible stories shines a bright light of hope your players are supposed to represent. Stormclaw may be a terrible person, but the Pack of the Northern Expanse, Jane, Horus, Gloria, and Firehound are not. Werewolf isn't about rage. It's about cleansing the world of corruption through rage. That means it has to have these terrible things, not as an endorsement, but as something to rage against. From corruption comes redemption. From rage, catharsis. Speaking of dark, misunderstood things, the freaking Shadow Lords. If you want to play this tribe because you want a license to lie, manipulate, and backstab your friends so you can be the coolest Garou ever, do everyone a favor, including yourself, and don't. If that's what you think playing Shadow Lords is about, I'm sorry to say you missed the point. Those who are only there for themselves are only worthy of contempt from other Shadow Lords, and will often meet their ends in unexpected ways. However, if you want a game filled with intrigue, lies, manipulation, and backstabbing, you must navigate through using those very same elements as tools to survive, and hopefully bring about positive outcomes for the Sept. That's what playing a Shadow Lord is about. Ideally, you do the whole shady actions with good outcomes without anyone knowing you had anything to do with it. See, the Lords aren't glory hounds, because heroes and legends, they get targets on their backs. It's another reason why they never go for the position of leadership if they can avoid it. After all, one can rule just as easily just by having the king or queen's ear. Bonus is you get to do it without being the target of quite as many assassination attempts. And if one of the attempts happen to succeed, for reasons that may or may not have anything to do with you, then you just need to get the ear of the next ruler and keep on scheming. Which brings us to the notion of sacrifice. Shadow Lords and Get of Fenris are very similar. Less extreme or violent for sure, but just as dedicated to sacrificing anything and everything for the cause. The big difference is that the Fenrir begin with themselves. They will gladly die to save the day, whereas the Shadow Lords will sacrifice themselves last. It's not that they can't be selfless. Again, they do what they do for the greater good, and they absolutely will bleed for it. But, where a Geta Fenris might see their death as the ultimate contribution they can make, a Shadow Lord believes they can do more good in the long term. A fighter can die in battle, that's what they're good for. But a dead Shadow Lord can't go undercover to infiltrate a Black Spiral hive to discover the plans to take over Cairn. A dead Shadow Lord can't shield the Sept from the worst of a leader's madness, or finish preparing the way for the next one to take the mantle. A dead Shadow Lord can't keep the Garou's end of a secret truce with vampires no one else knows about, so they get distrust and fear. People know how shady the Lords can be. They hear stories and rumors, but they never know the full story. They never know the price the Lords have had to pay to keep the peace or to stop complete devastation, because few Garou have what it takes to know the full story and still face the dark. Few, but the Shadow Lords. Like many tribes, the Shadow Lords have their own little cliques, quirks, and concepts. In their cases, it's the notion of shadow moots, secret gatherings of the Shadow Lords, where they strategize and scheme to get the Garou moving, or to get other supernatural elements to act in ways that benefit the tribe's long-term plans. It's a thing. I'm not a big fan of it, as it usually means your Shadow Lord players won't be calling their own shots. They'll usually be a pawn in some Elder's game. I see how it makes sense, and how it can be a great narrative setup to give a player an objective to accomplish. But once the game starts, do you really want scenes where only the Shadow Lord players can be involved, while the other players just have to wait around, and everyone's just listening to a bunch of NPC elders talk and make decisions? There are ways to tweak and make this work, but it should have been just better implemented from the start. One more thing to discuss. An important part of Shadow Lord's history has to do with the Second War of Rage. Early on in Season 1, I mentioned the existence of other changing breeds. Were cats, were spiders, that sort of thing. I mentioned how there was a war that ended up exterminating a bunch of those other shifters. Depending on which editions you're reading, the Garou may even believe they wiped all of them. Or there may have been more than one such wars. Later books and retcons have realized that some of these breeds could not have existed back in the time of the original War of Rage, and that once they did, there were oceans that would have made a war pretty difficult. At least that's how I explain the inconsistencies. In the case of the Shadow Lords, the version mentioned in their 2nd edition tribe book is that the Second War happened as Europeans explored the Americas. The Shadow Lords met the Camisots, a breed of bat shifters whose Krynos form resembled the war form of the flesh-crafting vampires Sharp Eyes mentioned above, the Tzimisce. This led to immediate and incorrect assumptions, and war broke out again. It did not relent until the last of the werebats were dead. As a result, the patron spirit Bat turned to the worm. Shadow Lords of today recognize this mistake. Some have joined a faction known as the Children of Bat, dedicated to the redemption of this patron totem. Normally, this is where I would start a whole thing about 5th edition's version of the tribe, how it missed critical aspects of a tribe or some such, but no, not this time. The Shadow Lords are the Shadow Lords. In fact, the write-up is very good at showcasing what they do, how they do it, and why they do it, resolving much of the misconception they had in Legacy. Kudos! This one is squarely in the wins column. And so we've only 3 tribes to go. The season is drawing close to its finale. Join us back next episode where the older brother tribe's aid is required.